All right, welcome back to the program. In case you're just joining us again, or in case you're just joining us, it's still Moneyline with Nancy. This should be your favorite business program on television, you know, on this channel, African Independent Television. Earlier on, I did say that we'll be looking at poverty. Poverty has so many facets. If we're looking at poverty, I know that we can't talk about it at least in the next 40-45 minutes. We can't finish talking about it. But it's something that I am determined to still continue to talk about, because in Nigeria right now we have a lot of people that are extremely poor. Over 90 million of us are extremely poor. Now let me introduce my guest. Mathias Tsado is a development expert. He's just to my immediate right. Mathias, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Nancy.
Close to Mathias is Cynthia Mbamalu. She is the programs manager, YIAGA Africa. Welcome, Cynthia.
Thank you, Nancy.
Now, let's get started. At the beginning of the program, I did, try to define what poverty is. Because, I've heard some people say, oh, that Nigeria being the world's poverty capital is an exaggeration. That how can we be more than India that has more than 1 billion people? India has a population of about 1.2 billion people. That it's not realistic. And Nigeria is about, the UN says now we're 201 million people. NPC, Population Commission, says we're close to that. But whatever it is, we are many in the country. Are we really a poor country? Let me start with that. Let me start with Mathias. Is Nigeria a country of extremely... Okay, let me put it this way. Because the two questions could mean different things.
That's true.
Are we really a country of extremely poor people? Not are we a poor country? We'll come to that.
Yes.
Because the two are not the same thing. They are two different things.
Items,
yes.
Actually.
So is Nigeria a country of extremely poor people?
Based on available data and based on the information that we've seen across the country, and even based on the things that we see on the streets of our country, we can say that yes, Nigeria today, as we speak, houses a huge number of poor, very extremely poor people. So, and then if we accept other good ratings that come from these global organizations, like when they talk about our ease of doing business has come down a bit, and we accept it, why shouldn't we accept when they tell us that, look, there are certain negative things that exist in your country, and look for how to deal with it. Based on, even on the streets of the country, you can see for yourself that, look, we're not doing well. I don't want to so much go about the fact that data problem in Nigeria has become a huge problem, but if you look around your house, the number of calls you receive on daily basis, people asking you for help, the number of people you see on the street. I was just coming from Kaduna this morning, and then on the traffic problem.
Did you take the train or you took?
No, I drove down.
Oh, okay.
You know, and then there's
Sorry,
this.
how is the security situation?
Well, it's to a large extent. I've not really seen anything on tours and around that particular area. I've been plying the road for a number of years now, but that's not to say that it's not happening. I was in the traffic and I saw a couple of young people that are supposed to be in school, begging with their bowls, asking you for one thing to help them with 1 naira, 2 naira, and stuff like that. So I think we should accept the current reality, the fact, what they call the brutal fact, that this is our current reality. We have a huge number of people on the streets of Nigeria who are not doing well, who are not supposed to be on the street, who are supposed to be gainfully engaged, doing one thing or the other, bringing resources to themselves and be able to take care of their own lives in their families and stuff like that. But now that we don't have such kind of thing going on, we should accept the reality. And the reality is that as we speak now, over 90 million, if the country is not housing 100 million people, 100 million poor people, the president wouldn't have come out to say that I want to lift 100 million people out of poverty. So it's the reality.
Cynthia, where do you stand?
Well, I think it's for us to look at this and maybe be more systematic in our assessment. And that is basically to ask ourselves, as a people, what's the quality and standard of living for the average Nigerian, the ordinary Nigerian in the country, and then look at affordability and accessibility of goods and services, beyond just affordability, availability also of goods and services, and how citizens can access and how citizens can access and how those goods and services impact on their life. And then also you look at the quality of education and the rate or level of unemployment. So perhaps if you look at certain indicators, you can start, you can maybe have a better assessment. And for me, no matter how bitter a truth is, if it's real, and we need to address that as real issues. You look at the burgeoning population, youth population, which ordinarily should be an asset. But the more we do not harness and invest in that population, the more it becomes a threat to our national development. So when we say there is an increase in poverty, it's real. How? If you see that in every quarter there's an increase in the rate of unemployment, that shows that if you have more people becoming unemployed or underemployed, it means they have little access to the things that would make their lives worth enjoying or worth living or enhance the quality of their life. So if we have that increasing, and there's a problem. If we have more children out of school, then there is a problem. That also shows that there are more people who cannot afford to send their children to school, or there are schools that cannot afford to take more children. If we have an increase in insecurity and more internally displaced persons, beyond insecurity, but also internally displaced person based on natural disasters, and we have more displaced communities. That also shows that there is a cohort or a large population of people who do not have access to housing, who do not have access to providing themselves with their daily needs or daily feeding. So that also shows that you have more people who can afford to take care of themselves. So that is also showing us that there is an increase in poverty. So whether we want to accept that there is an increase in poverty or not, the reality is that these actually exist. And just taking a walk on the street, even as an individual, how many people call you these days just because if they see you, for instance, hosting a TV show and think you have all the resources to ask you for help? How many people have reached out to you?
I get that on a daily basis.
So if more people...
So I need a job, I do this. I don't run a job recruiting agency. Neither am I an official of government or whatever, but you get such calls on a daily basis.
Yes, and that is an indication that we have a major problem and crisis at our hands. And regardless of how government wants to acknowledge or accept that, the reality is staring us at the face. And as a people, as a nation, what we need to focus on is how do we turn the hands of time? How do we change our reality to something that actually is more positive, or something that would provide advantages to the people? And if you look at beyond just Nigeria, I think within the continent, this is a growing crisis, the increase in poverty. But you have more countries investing in building or getting their nation or their people out of poverty. So for instance, if you look at the African Union Agenda 2063, it talks about how one of the aspirations is how do you achieve inclusive growth and how do you achieve development that is driven by the people. And that is because even within the continent, when you say Africa, one of the continents that would experience growth by 2050, and Nigeria will be one of 9 countries to actually be among the largest by 1920 and by 2050, it also shows that there is that problem of how do we manage this population, how do we manage our diversity, and how do we increase production to drive the market forces that would enable economic development and even achieve sustainable development. So this is a reality, and it is out there and it's staring us in our faces.
You know, you've brought out a whole lot of dimensions, and we'll try as much as possible to see if we can interrogate the issues further and try to also proffer solutions. If there are, like I said during the intro, if there are really quick wins to fighting poverty. But I will go back to the question which I asked earlier. Both of you have addressed, and you all both agree that Nigeria is a country of extremely poor people. That is realistic. You just see it there on the street. Now the question will be, is Nigeria a poor country? Because I remember that President Jonathan in 2014 did say that Nigeria is not a poor country. Our problem is not poverty, but redistribution of wealth. That's what he said, you know. And it also got me thinking, I think that time too, I interrogated further. But the issue is still here. Poverty is still here. So is it that we have a problem of poverty or redistribution of wealth? It's like I'm dragging both of you back, but with a different
dimension.
Yes, with a different dimension.
I think that, you see, Nigeria, as a matter of fact, Nigeria is a blessed country. Everyone in the world have accepted this to be the truth. However, that you have the potentials to be a great nation does not necessarily mean that automatically you become a great nation. There has to be a lot of work that would have to be done to ensure that from the place of potential, everything that you have, the resources that you have, both human and material, are put together to ensure that you become, you are able to use these resources to better the lives of your citizens. We have a nation where everything that we have as a problem is actually right inside of it is a solution. You have a problem of insecurity, you have a problem of growing youth population, and you have a problem of infrastructural decay or deficit. You have the housing deficit of almost 17 million. This has been hanging around for a number of years. Now, I don't know. I'm thinking that why can't government for once sit down and have a critical thinking about the issues and begin to design a system to address these problems? If you have young people roaming around the streets of your country, and you can pick these young people from the street for them to build houses for you, why stopping you? What stops you from putting money in the pockets of these young people? I've always maintained that there is no way that you can have a nation that has this huge population and you are thinking of using just one resource to build a life for everybody. It's not going to work. We have to first look at our country and maybe categorize our economic sectors. Ask ourselves, what can we do in sport and entertainment? What can we do in housing and construction? What can we do in agriculture? What can we do in services? What can we do in oil and gas?
Are you saying we are not seeing? Because we are seeing that, but perhaps they are just inside.
That's why the issues that you see, when you want to analyze the problems of this country, you sound unintelligent because the problems are too mundane for them to be a problem. Because everything that you are looking at are simple. If somebody who is serious wants to solve the problem, it doesn't even need technical teams to put their heads together to solve the problem because they are too glaring. But because you don't have people who are committed, who are willing, who are desirous of solving the problems of the country, we continue to wallow in this poverty. And I think that until we have a system, a government, like Cynthia said, and we have a system that is driven by the people, that you have a huge number of Nigerians who are able to, on daily basis, able to earn something, and out of what they earn, they are able to make their own contribution to the economy. And I was reading something about this, I think the PwC report about 900 billion debt, dead capital.
Debt capital. Yes, I saw that report last
You see, like, we have a whole lot locked down in Nigeria,
$100
but unfortunately, we have not been able to have the kind of leadership that have the capacity to pull everything together to say, look, here is a defined goal. Here is where we want to go to in housing. This is the number of houses we expect the Ministry of Housing to deliver to us in the next maybe 6 months, in the next 12 months.
Private sector to do that.
Yeah.
So what you're trying to say in essence is that how do we link the different sectors of the economy? In other words, making us a productive
basically
people and bringing in the rising population, youthful population into it. Because a lot of people have also got, I'm of the view, okay, now you talked about security. How many policemen do we have in the country? I think 500,000.
Less than.
Yeah.
Less than is required.
Yes, it's still less than is required. So we can still
Far.
employ a lot more policemen. We can have a lot more young people doing agriculture, services, technology, and all of, even the environment, cleaning.
And those are
environment
actually
alone.
the quick wins.
Yeah, those are the quick wins, isn't it?
Yes.
Now, Cynthia, let me come to you. It seems that poverty is man-made.
True.
Isn't it? Did God create anyone to say you will be a poor person? So poverty is man-made. So that means that if poverty is man-made, that means the solutions can also be man-made. Instead of us shouting in our churches and in our mosques, it's not our portion. Lack and want is not mine. The churches shouldn't come for me this morning, you know. But the Bible says too that whatever your hand findeth to do, that God will prosper it. So you need to find work first. Instead of saying, I will prosper in Jesus' name, and you're not doing anything, I receive it. So, you know, the poverty will still continue. So what I'm trying to say, in essence, is that it's man-made. So the solutions also will be man-made. You know, this brings me to the issue of what happened in Brazil. Because if you're talking about countries that have fought poverty or that are still fighting poverty, Brazil and India comes to mind with their various intervention programs. In Brazil, there's what the program they call Bolsa Familia, I think, which was introduced in 2003. And during my intro, I did tell our viewers that the program, government was given a conditional cash transfer of 70 real. That's about $30 US. In Nigeria now, with our exchange rate, about 6,510 naira or so, to families to help them cushion poverty. And you know, in the next few years, they were able to quantify that a lot of Brazilians have moved out of the extremely poor net. In India too, the same thing. In fact, there are programs of, let's just build toilets all over India, because there was this problem of defecation, which Nigeria also has the problem of major problem of defecation. So how should we now address the issue of fighting poverty? Talking about the solutions now, bringing these models that I've just spoken about.
Yeah, this is an interesting conversation, because I also picked interest in Singapore. If you want to look at countries that we achieved independence around the same period. And how they moved from third world to leading economies in the world. It's not just Singapore. If you look at China, for instance, you know, and you'd see when Lee Kuan Yew had the vision, and for him it was to bring his people out of poverty. They did not have skilled manpower. They did not have as much natural resources like we did. That when he started building the country, but they had the vision and they had the plan, which was introduced through political policies and legislations then by the People's Action Party, the PAP. Now you look at those countries and you also see what countries, like you said, like Brazil and India, dealing with, and then you say, why do we still have this major challenge? Because we as the supposed giants of Africa should have emerged as one of the leading economies in the world, but we're still battling with that. And I think the problem or the challenge we have is more about developing policies that suits our local context and implementing it to ensure results are achieved. And why I say that is a problem is because you see, one, for each government that comes, there's a policy introduced, there is lack of continuity. So what we have is, over the years, we have economic policies that are developed to build our economy that supposedly achieve certain results, but there is no continuity or consolidation on those results to move us to the development that we want. And that has become a problem. And then we see the lack of this continuity by even present government. So let's talk about the conditional cash transfer, which is actually ongoing now. It's one of the policies under the social investment program of the President Buhari's administration. There's the conditional, there's the trader money, I think the farmer money, the market money, and all of that, which goes to different categories of persons. And there is the requirements for some of those categories. After 6 months, you pay back the loan, and you'd have an increase in the monies that you'd receive.
Money, if you pay the 10,000,
you get 15,000 naira. Now that's in itself, if you look at it at the face of it, that adds value, because certain persons would have expectation of certain income coming into their receiving certain income at a particular period of time. However, the question is this sustainable? And for those transfers, for those either N power or whatever it is under the SIP, how do you track track impact? And how do you ensure that for every production, for every goods and service, there's a market to consume? There's a market to sustain that. Because it's one thing to give out cash, it's another thing to have an enabling environment that the market forces in those environments ensures that with each money that you put in the investment, there is productivity and there is certain profit that you'd achieve. And that is where we have a challenge. Because if we do not address the question of the lack of an enabling environment to drive economy, then regardless of how much we pump or put into it, we would not be receiving the profits that we want. So first, address create an enabling environment that enables production and productivity. And the other is skilled manpower. Now, one of the things Singapore adopted when it started as a nation was basically to build and invest in human capital development. So even import the people who would help drive to help increase productivity and build capacities. Now, that is one of the things we need to acknowledge, that at the rate that we are going, we do not have sufficient skilled manpower to meet up to produce to achieve the level of productivity that we want, that will take us out of poverty. So we need to start that level of investment in development of human capital, in developing skilled manpower in the sector, in the system. And that is why you look at the issue of the education. So for instance, look at the homegrown feeding school program.
Yes.
Yeah, where
the
school program for the food given to the schools for children, so to increase more kids going to school. And then the question is, with the increase of more children in school, do we have a balance, in the sense that the teachers who are teaching these children, beyond just having the capacity to teach, there is also an increase in the numbers of teachers who are actually teaching these children? Because what you have is you have an increase in enrollment in school, but you don't have a balance, a commensurate increase
of staff that would
build the capacity of these children, not just build the capacity, but adequately equip them to meet the challenges of modern times. Because what we have is that the world is moving in a pace that if Nigeria does not catch up, we will be left behind. So for instance, how do we leverage innovation to drive productivity? And that brings in the aspect of technology. Our curriculum designed in such a way that the average young person that leaves the education system can actually compete with their contemporaries in the world. Do we have that level of conscious and targeted investment in our people to meet the challenges of our current and present time?
Because if you also want to fight poverty, like they say, if you want to fight poverty, you also need to fight poverty through education. Bill Gates did tell us when he came to Nigeria, invest more in human capital. You're taking a look at education, you're taking a look at health. For example, not for example, is a fact. 30% of Nigerian children are stunted. That's a fact. That's the statistics. That 30% of Nigerian children are stunted in growth. You're talking about the homeschool feeding program. This administration has gone forth to say, okay, it's also helping our agricultural sector. The eggs that are being used to feed those children are from our farmers and all of that. But beyond all of that, I'm also reliably told that some children will come and eat. After eating, they'll leave. They don't come.
They'll stay back.
Yes, they just come and eat and go. So how do you measure, just like you said, impact of such policies which we're talking about. Now, what do we do to end poverty the Nigerian way? Because if you take a look at some countries, they've targeted poverty with their own models. So what Nigerianized model or Nigerianized models do we need to fight poverty? Since poverty is man-made, since this poverty is Nigeria-made, yes, poverty made in Nigeria. Since it's poverty made in Nigeria, what Nigeria-made solutions do we need to fight the poverty? Bearing in mind what is really happening right now, perhaps all the things that government is doing. If we also need to advise government that you've taken this road of social investment program, but it seems that it's not bringing the desired result, can we really turn the corner and do something else? This administration has another 4 years and It's already 4 minus something
So
now.
minus 1 month.
Yes. Do you understand? If they need to turn the corner and say, okay, let's go another route, is it possible? Since the president said in his Democracy Day speech that we can lift 100 million people out of poverty
Okay. So
in
here's
10 years.
So here is my take on this issue. Now, as a country, first of all, let's even accept the offer of the president to say he wants to leave, or he wished to lift 100 million people out of poverty in 10 years. So let's put it that in every 1 year we will lift 10 million people out of poverty. And that means in 4 years, you would have lifted 40 million people out of poverty. In every month, you would have lifted about 825,000 people out
so
of poverty.
So 10 million every year.
So far, based on the president's promise, June has come to an end, and nothing seems to have been done. So it means that if I am the president's boss, or if I'm the one that recruited him to do the job for me, and he's going to be measured based on that promise he made, the president should not be paid his salary for June. All his team members, all the people working for him, should not be paid for the month of June because they've done. Because
yes, Cynthia is smiling.
From the performance, yes, there should be.
If you don't work well, you don't earn your salary.
You don't get your pay.
Yes.
Now, but let's focus on practical solutions to this problem. I have mentioned one thing, housing, for instance. If you want to build 2,000 houses today in Nigeria, you will need at least 10 people to work in each of this, each of the sites, each of the buildings. That is 2,000 times 10, 20,000 people that probably are roaming around the streets of this country. Cynthia said something about skilled labor. At this point, even semi-skilled and unskilled labor is required to help us to lay the foundation for the basic things we need. So you are looking at someone who is going to go take block from one place to the other. What skill does he need? And this is the way we can begin to stimulate something, that we ensure that we are laying the foundation for the kind of society that we are trying to build. So we are looking at, you want to build 2,000 houses, you need about 20,000 young people to be on that site for the next 5 to 6 months. If you are looking at, you can multiply that and continue to look at the multiplier effect. So if you'll be looking at 1 million houses in Nigeria, you're looking at about 10 million people. These areas can lift a huge number of people out of poverty. Why that is going on, you can look at sport and entertainment. What can we do to ensure that these areas become very productive? Not the one that we have at the moment where people just go into all kinds of things and it is not productive. How do we ensure that Nigeria become a wealth-creating society, not just resources distribution kind of society? And these are the things that I think government need to focus on. I read something about the president of Ghana. He says something about a factory per street, per district. Factory per district is a policy that Ghana is pursuing by all means. And this is the kind of society that we want to sign Africa Free Trade agreements with. If you sign all of these things that we are trying to go into, I wrote a few days ago that the president should not, because I feel that Nigeria as a society is not ready. We are
you don't
not
want the president to sign the FCTA?
No, I don't think so. I think the
even as being the giant of
I think the
Africa?
society, the country is not ready. At the end of the day, we will just end up being a dumping site, which we are already, and it maybe more things would happen to us and discourage even the little that is going on in the manufacturing sector in Nigeria at the moment. So how do we get
That's
this?
That's a topic for another day.
Yes, but how do we get to the point where you can have Samsung, for instance, to come to Nigeria and say, you know what, even if it is just your, what do they call it, this protector, that let's just even start with that. And then you get, even if it's just 500 young people. See, one thing about solving a problem is if you deploy a technique and you are able to solve one problem, one small problem, and you see result, the excitement of it will push you to do more. But we just keep talking, playing lip service to issues that are not supposed to be problem. Nigeria should begin to look at how to get the society to become productive. And it is not just about you having made in Nigeria. Made in Nigeria is not the solution to our problem. Why not deploy what I call make in Nigeria? Why can't we have companies from different parts of the world come in here to set up their systems? This is what Lee Kuan Yew did. Call all the multinational corporations to come into Singapore. Say, come and operate. We will give you the environments for you to operate. Now, and with that, you have thousands of
There must be an enabling environment. The issue also would be, will Nigerians have the purchasing power to get all
it is the same. You see, here is something. If you have the problem of purchasing power is this: if Cynthia recruits me now to produce this lens of this phone, I will work in Cynthia's company and I will earn money from what I earn from this place. I've added to my purchasing power.
So it's a value chain.
So it's a cycle until we get to address the fundamentals. And which the fundamental is that we must begin to look at how do we create wealth, and by so doing get companies across the country to say, across the world to come to Nigeria, this same country, and say, look, I am setting up my own country, I am setting up my company here for the next 10 to 20 years. This is our plan. And so for that reason, like she said, we have to have a situation where there is continuity in policies.
Okay. Cynthia?
Yeah, I think why I was laughing when you talked about performance is actually because some countries I know, I think Singapore, one of the justification for the PAP to remain in power was what they called performance legitimacy, because it wasn't about you being a political leader, but actually performing. And that's one of the things we need to start looking into. But beyond that, I think one is how do we promote a system of excellence that drives competition? And that is one of the things that I think we need to reevaluate and reassess as a nation. We do not have a system that promotes excellence. We have a system of patronage. So that is why there's a lot of questions. Even the economic
is it a system of patronage or a system of mediocrity?
Mediocrity
celebrated.
Mediocrity celebrated, and also patronage, because what we have is, regardless of whether you're performing or not, there will always be a class of persons who would say, oh, because of you are this person or that person from this place, then you should have this. Not whether, oh, because you're performing better, because you have the capacity, then you should have access to these opportunities or what have you. So that is one. The other is also what Mathias talked about opening up the economy in such a way, and that is also, that drives into the point of competition, because when you have more people invest, you'd increase competition, that even nationals would also learn to compete, because then there's exchange of experiences, and there's also an exposure to new ways or modern ways of doing things. So that is one. But what needs to happen to have that done is enabling environment, and that is why when it comes to enabling environment, is the intentionality of our budget, the way it is designed to focus on actually achieving infrastructural development, and then also investing a lot in education, and then investing beyond investing in education, but also creating a space where the forces driving economic development is actually domestic, and it is driven by the people. And one of the things I think is lacking is a lack of connectivity between economic policy at the national, at the state and local level. So what you have are states working in silos, you have federal government working also in silos, and then what that does is like there's a national plan for economic development that does not connect with state development plans, and that there is no joint effort to ensure that at different levels there are different forces driving development. So you have different projects, different programs working, not just at the national and state level, even at the national level. Look at the MDAs. So you look at different budget allocation to different MDAs. Now, there are levels of connectivity amongst these different ministries, departments, and agencies, but you don't see that synergy in the work that you have in the implementation of the budget. So you have every agency doing one thing, but not connecting with that. So the agriculture sector is saying, yes, we want to invest and promote agriculture, but what about energy? Because you also know that if you're moving to industrialization and bringing in technology to drive productivity in the agriculture sector, you need that synergy with the energy sector to ensure that there's sufficient energy. And then that's with the environment, with the conversation on climate change and
with
the
water resources ministry.
So at the end, it's all linked. So you see at different levels, but that connection and connectivity is not there. There is a lot lacking. And if you don't build, if you don't focus in doing that scenario planning, okay, where do we want Nigeria to be in the next 2-3 years? Not just 10 for it. So we start planning a year and 2 years ahead. That's scenario planning. And then looking at, okay, this is where we want to be now. This is the existing realities. Now, how do we bridge the gap with every intervention that we have?
You know, while you were just talking, some things were just coming through my mind. I said, isn't this a serious and emergency situation that perhaps the president, and I think he should be the president, irrespective of the pockets of things he's doing, like the social investment program and all of that, like I said, can he interrogate further and say, the country is now a country of extremely poor people, the world's poverty capital. I have social investment program, I have this Anchor Boras program by the central bank. You see, even the central bank is doing a lot of this to be able to quench unemployment and poverty. Will they be successful at it? Perhaps time will tell. But isn't it time that the government should say, and when I mean government, I mean both the central and state government, come together and say, poverty is an imminent challenge right now. It has a lot of facets, security. Can we call even an emergency and see how we can begin to link all the sectors to be able to quench poverty? That's what's coming to my mind, but perhaps.
And that is actually a way that we should go, because regardless of how we claim to be a federal system, which we are yet to achieve, there's still a lot of focus on the center. That is why I have a lot of states that are not economically viable. So what you have is a lot of dependency on the central government, and then there is that lack. So it's like everyone is doing, every MDA wants to come up with an initiative to fight poverty or increase employment. But how does this fit into the national plan, or what the president termed the economic and recovery growth plan? How does this all fit into that? And that is what is missing. And until we address that missing link, we will still be having that challenge. And then focus on inclusive growth and actually promote sustainable development. Because at the end, I'll bring in the gender dimension, because I'm a woman.
In fact, that's my last question to you. If poverty in Nigeria has a woman face?
Well, unfortunately, sometimes you could actually say yes, because we actually have an increasing gender gap when it comes to economic development between the male and female gender. And that is because we have, as a people, failed to acknowledge the historical discrimination that has put women at a disadvantage when it comes to economic development, and created new means of addressing that. So in each intervention, we must always assess that through the gender lens. Even the budget, to gender audit the budget, how does this budget, the national budget, how does it address the existing gender gap? How do more women become economically empowered to sustain themselves and their families with this national budget? How do each intervention program address women? Because one of the things we have to start looking now into as a nation is to close the gender gaps. Because the more we have more women who are economically disempowered, the more difficult it is for us to fight the challenges of the development,
to lift
people out of poverty, and even achieve sustainable development. So we always need to look at the gender dimension to every policy that we evolve or design as a people.
You know, at the beginning I did say that we cannot exhaust this issue of poverty, because they have different facets. The other facet, which I'll also like to bring up on another date, is the issue of financial system, financial inclusion. How our financial system are they also fighting poverty or reducing poverty? You talked about the issue of growth. We should also take a look at the structure of growth which we have, and the quality of growth if we need to continue. But I want to say many thanks to you both. We'll continue the conversation on a later date.
Very good.
Matthias, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Lanta.
Cynthia, thank you for coming too.
Thank you for
All right, I've been speaking with Mathias, Tsado, a development expert, as well as Cynthia Mbamalu,